I've gone to the MTC. I did have to karate chop an armed guard before I went in, but I finally made it through. Hello Saints, my name is Jeff. I am a pastor in Utah exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And there's one place that I've really been wanting to do a tour of for quite some time, and that is the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah, also known as the MTC. So I'm really excited to do this tour to learn a little bit more about Latter-day Saints missions training and to see how it's similar or different from training in a Protestant evangelical context. So let's go do the tour. So what do I know about the Missionary Training Center? Well, from what I understand, it's where individuals who are going to serve on their 2-year mission go to be trained. I think there's a lot of language training that takes place there. And it's sort of the last stop before they head out. And it's kind of a big deal that they're leaving their family for 2 years, and this is where they're going to get all the training they need to carry out the mission. I've also been told that it's kind of a secure area, that there's a wall and gates, and someone even told me that there's an armed guard. I don't know if that's true. It seems like that would be a little bit peculiar if that was the case. So I don't know if I believe that, but I'm glad that I've got the opportunity to go in and see what it's like and to see what their training is like, because I know it can be a pretty big moment for a lot of individuals who are about to serve on their Latter-day Saint mission. All right, here we are rolling up to the Missionary Training Center, and looks like a pretty big complex. Should be an interesting tour. All right, I just arrived. Missionary Training Center is right down the hill here. I'm gonna meet the individuals that are giving me the tour. Let's see if I can get past the armed guards. Okay, the tour is over. I've gone to the MTC. I did have to karate chop an armed guard before I went in, but I finally made it through. I'm kidding. I was met by some amazing people who greeted me, gave me a great tour. I've got some processing I want to do, and I want to put on some more comfortable clothes. So let's head out, and I'll give you my thoughts. All right. I'm wearing something a little bit more comfortable now, and I feel a little bit more prepared to give you my thoughts on my tour of the MTC. What was it like? What happened? What did I feel while I was there? Well, let's start with how the tour unfolded. When I showed up, I did have to go through a gate, and there was a little kiosk with a nice young lady in it, making sure she was checking in the people that were supposed to be there. And there was a gate for cars to drive through, but I kind of got the impression that this is just a place where they want to make sure it's secure, because at any given time, there could be up to 3,000 young men and women being trained at the MTC, and they want to make sure that it's a secure location. I did not see an armed guard, and I didn't have to get patted down or go through security. We walked right in, and as soon as I entered into the main area, it was very clearly a Latter-day Saint institution. There was Latter-day Saint art everywhere. There were statues. There were photos and portraits of church leaders. I walked down some stairs and entered into a main hallway and passed by a dining commons, or a cafeteria, if you will. And it looked very much like the dining commons at the college that my wife and I went to. And based on the size of this dining area, it was actually kind of impressive when you think about the number of trainees that are at the MTC at any given time. They have to have a pretty tight schedule to be getting people in and out for 3 meals a day and making sure everybody's taken care of. Beyond this building, I saw a couple of offices before we walked outside, and I was able to see the main campus, which was beautiful. There were walkways and there was green space. There were lots of benches. There were tons of sculptures and just imagery that seemed to really encompass the focus of the MTC. And from what I understand, over the last 5 to 10 years, they've been doing a lot to the MTC campus to make sure that it is wide open and it's easy to walk through, and there's a lot of open spaces. Because as we were walking across the campus, the trainees were taking advantage of it. They were all in groups and they were outside talking, hanging out, studying. I think some of them were actually quizzing each other and doing what might have looked like role play, as they were just very focused in these little groups, helping each other out as they prepared one another for their upcoming missions. We then went into a recreational building, and there was a gymnasium, and there were trainees in there that were just kind of having some free time. But it was pretty clear that there's a desire for balance here, where you had some trainees outside in their nice clothes studying, while other ones were in there kind of taking a break and getting a little physical activity in. The next building that we went into was a newer building, and it was really beautiful. I think built within the past 5 to 7 years, but it was wide open and there were tons of windows, lots of natural light. And as we walked into this area, I think the thing that struck me most is, in addition to the fact that there were clearly classrooms marked out for these students to go and get their training and to study with one another, there was art everywhere. That's one thing that just continues to strike me as I enter into a Latter-day Saint space. How much art and imagery and iconic representation of beliefs and scriptures are all around you. In one of the main areas, there was this beautiful piece of art that had these descending white strands, and in the middle of it there was a globe, and it was supposed to represent how the earth is sort of immersed in this eternal or celestial cloud of individuals and purposes, and it was a pretty captivating piece of art. In addition to these main common spaces in the educational building, there were gigantic images of various scripture stories, and they were layered graphics that were backlit, so it actually looked like you could enter into them. There were scriptural settings from the Book of Mormon showing Nephi, showing the brother of Jared, and other biblical ones like the Book of Esther, and I think the one that struck me the most was of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. It again was just so layered, so textured, and the way the light interacted with this gigantic image, you felt like you could walk right into it, which made it really neat whenever you're standing there just looking at it and you feel that you're actually witnessing what was taking place in this scriptural setting. We were then guided into a classroom where there was a group of MTC trainees actually being trained. There was probably 12 to 15 individuals in this room, and they haven't been at the MTC very long, and they were actually getting ready to leave because they have minimal training, being that they were all serving English-speaking missions in various places in America. So there wasn't a whole lot of language training that they needed to undergo or any sort of cultural training. They were going to be serving missions in places like New York, New Jersey, and Texas. But it was really neat just to get a taste for what these young men and women are trained in. I asked the instructor what the topic was that they were discussing, and he said it was how to deal with individuals who come to a conversation with a lot of needs or carrying heavy burdens, even if they're individuals that might have some issues with addiction or might be carrying certain levels of trauma where they're needing to process through some things or might need a little bit of additional guidance. To be training these 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds to figure out how to maneuver through those conversations seemed like a pretty healthy focus. So it's not just about knocking on doors and giving the pitch, but this is actually about engaging people where they are. In that classroom, they also showed me something that I didn't even know existed, and that is the Missionary Handbook. And I was able to thumb through that, and it was just completely filled with all of the various scriptural points, doctrinal points, and even situational prompts on what missionaries might need to know in certain situations so they could pull it out and reference the handbook if they need to while they're on their mission. I think another thing that struck me as I was just briefly engaging with this group of trainees is that they seem to be exhibiting a certain level of courage. Keep in mind, and I'll talk about this more in just a second, these are young men and women that have just left high school. And rather than going off to college and starting to become a little bit more focused on themselves and what their major is going to be, or instead of taking a gap year before they get their gen eds out of the way at a community college, not that there's anything wrong with that path. That's the path that myself and a lot of my friends took. They are entering into a space that is tied to their faith, that is tied to conversations that are going to probably stretch them. It's going to put them in situations that are going to put them outside of their comfort zone. And I think the courage that I was observing was in a serious recognition of what it was that they were embarking on, and also I think a camaraderie that I could sense within that group. One thing that I thought was really cool is how when we as outsiders see Latter-day Saint missionaries going door to door, we all observe that they do so in groups of two or in pairings. And I've since learned that there's usually an older missionary and a younger or newer missionary, that they never want to put two new missionaries out in the field by themselves to sort of figure out how to do everything, especially if they're abroad. But you have that older companion who's got a little bit of experience that can kind of bring that younger companion along. Well, that missionary pairing is actually how they send Latter-day Saint missionaries through the MTC. They're actually given a training companion that they pair up with, and they, I think from what I understand, are usually going to the same region. But like I said, since they will be paired with a more experienced missionary when they get there, they're only with each other through the MTC, and then once they travel out there, they're separated. But it was super clear to just observe the intentionality that goes into helping these young men and women at the MTC begin to acclimate to this new system that they're going to be operating within for the next couple years as they serve on their mission. And to that point, one thing that just seemed very clear to me as we continued to walk around and see the various spaces within the different buildings and look at different classrooms and lecture halls, you can just tell that the MTC operates in a way as sort of a rite of passage for a lot of Latter-day Saints. There's this main wide open atrium in one of the buildings that it was explained to me this is where the incoming missionaries will enter whenever they're dropped off at the MTC. And it's a place where they can gather, and there is a huge wall with this scripture verse of what we call in the Protestant world, and probably in the Latter-day Saint paradigm as well, called the Great Commission out of Matthew. Just before Jesus ascends to the right hand of the Father, he gives very clear instructions for his disciples to go into all the world and to make disciples. That call, that commission, that prompt is staring these missionaries in the face the moment they walk into the MTC. So naturally, the church has to be very intentional to make sure that it is an optimal environment for these incoming men and women to have the focus that they need to have that's really going to monopolize every part of their lives for the next 2 years. The church sends out 70,000 missionaries every year. 40,000 of those pass through the MTC, and half of them go through training at the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah. So it is quite clear that there is a significant amount of intentionality and planning to make sure that all of these missionaries in training are in an optimal environment, to make sure that they're focused on this mission that they're entering into that will really define not just the next 2 years of their lives, but recognizing the impact it's probably going to make on them for the rest of their lives based on what they experience as they're carrying out this calling. So what then were my main takeaways of this tour? Beyond observing what I saw, what impression did it leave on me? You know, different regions and different people groups have certain social prompts and social cues that are common whenever they're meeting people in a certain region. For example, I grew up in the St. Louis area, and it is common, and I would say 100% of the time, that when you meet somebody for the first time, one of the first questions you ask them is, where did you go to high school? Because it just helps you locate where they lived, what their experience was, helps you find commonalities. Well, living in Utah, one of the primary social prompts that exists in conversation is when you meet someone and you find out they're a church member, you ask, where did you serve on your mission? So much of an individual is shaped and framed by what they experienced while they were serving on their mission. And that's clear on various levels. I mean, some of them you can tell were just deeply impacted by the culture that was around them. So especially if they were in South America or Africa or certain parts of Europe, they take with them beyond the mission the cultural assimilation that they had to experience in order to function within their calling. Another thing that it really clarifies is how comfortable they are understanding and articulating what they believe and why they believe it. This is probably where I can relate to something that I think is incredibly beneficial for individuals, regardless of your faith background, is at that age, making sure these individuals who are finding independence for the first time are dealing with some of the questions surrounding what they believe and why they believe it. It was when I was about that same age at a private Christian school that I was wrestling with those questions for the first time. And there's something about articulating those things to people who either aren't clear or have never heard it before that can really help you sort through where you stand in those beliefs and how it all fits together. This is something that I know Latter-day Saints take with them far beyond their mission. So it really was interesting to just sort of see what the launching point looks like for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as they prepare these individuals to go out and to serve on their missions. One thing tied to this that was very clearly communicated to me is that they do have a curriculum and a flow that these trainees go through. They spend between 3 and 6 weeks at home before they even go to the MTC doing at-home training. And then depending on how much language and culture training they need, they're going to be at the MTC anywhere from 3 weeks to maybe 9 to 12 weeks. But when it comes to the percentage of what they actually learn about the culture and about the language, and really even about articulating Latter-day Saint belief, most of that develops while they're out serving their mission. So I'm sure there are a lot of Latter-day Saints who look at the MTC with certain nostalgic feelings, or some of them might not have totally enjoyed their time at the MTC. But it's consistent also with what Latter-day Saints communicate to me, that the crux of what they took away from serving on their mission might have started at the MTC, but was really experienced while they were serving on their mission. And I think the main thing that was reinforced for me, being at the MTC, seeing all of these fresh trainees learning the ropes and finding what it's like to be outside of their comfort zones, many of them for the very first time, wasn't so much trying to understand what they were experiencing, but almost feeling and sensing the anticipation of what they were about to experience. I know I've touched on this in recent videos, but it bears repeating. Being at the MTC really reinforced this perspective that I have gained, that these missionaries are young men and women fresh out of high school, and they're not necessarily being trained to argue with people, to debate with people, to be apologetic experts for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they're doing their best to be able to understand and articulate doctrine for those who are interested in learning more. In a recent video, I think the illustration I use is that they're more tour guides than anything else. If you want to go on this tour of the LDS faith and beliefs and traditions, they're the ones that will show you around. So even though I don't necessarily align with a lot of the doctrines that were being taught at the MTC and maybe even some of the motivations behind why people serve on their missions, I still felt in a way a bit protective of these missionaries, because I know that they are going to be facing a lot of difficulty as they knock on doors, not knowing what's going to be on the other side, not knowing if there's going to be hostility or receptivity. And even if they do begin a conversation with someone, not knowing how it's going to unfold. That's a pretty intense existence for individuals at that age. And it's all the more reason why, as an outsider, I'm saying to a lot of other individuals within my context, Protestant evangelicals, to be kind to these young men and women, to be aware of the fact that though they are being courageous and they are being bold, we can play a role in helping care for them by just being kind, making sure they have what they need, engaging with them in conversation, even if you don't want to talk about doctrine, getting to know these young men and these young women. Those types of conversations, I'm sure, are life-giving. So based on what I learned about how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints handles missions work, how does it compare to how we handle missions work in the Protestant evangelical world? Well, I'm going to get into this in a lot more detail in a video that's coming up very soon, but to give the overview, I don't know of any Protestant denominations that have something like the MTC, where they're training young men and women right out of high school to carry out 2-year missions. That said, every denomination has training programs, and there are even other ministries that aren't necessarily specifically tied to denominations that will also train individuals that feel a calling to serve on the mission field. Now, one thing that is unique about this is that when someone feels the desire to serve on a mission, they're not necessarily called by a church authority. It's something that is a little bit more subjective, that they feel prompted by the Holy Spirit to enter into. And it becomes, in many cases, a vocation where they're raising funds and they're going into different parts of the world to either plant churches or help out with various ministries, humanitarian work. Maybe they're setting up orphanages, helping out at hospitals, establishing or teaching at Christian schools. It really varies on the person, and it varies on where they're going to serve on these missions. But more times than not, it's a lifelong commitment. It's not just a 2-year stint. In a lot of ways, it's how Protestant evangelicals handle pastoral ministry, where you reach a point where you say, I would like to work in ministry in a local church, and you typically go to school and you get training, and then you're hired by a church to function in a pastoral leadership role. And it is a career. And even if it's not a career that you get paid to do, more times than not, it's something that is done for the duration of someone's life. Most missionaries I know make that commitment and say, we're going to do this as long as the Lord gives us the ability and the resources to carry this out. And I know many who do it all the way through retirement, though some of them might step away from the mission field at some point to do something else or to function in other areas of ministry. But there is extensive training that takes place. It's done a little bit differently across different denominations. And one thing that I will say that I have heard is the sort of beautiful aspect of Protestant Christianity that I'm really passionate about. The fact that even though there are all these different denominations, we all agree on core doctrines and we believe we're on the same team. In America, people stay in their corners when it comes to the different denominations. So usually a lot of Lutherans will hang out with other Lutherans, and a lot of Pentecostals will hang out with other Pentecostals. And it's not that they shun one another, but that's just how they operate within their communities. But on the mission field, from what I understand, those denominational lines almost don't matter. Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist, Assemblies of God, even Catholic, rarely gets in the way of this missions work, because when you're in a mission field, the mission is the priority. It's spreading the gospel. It's helping individuals understand the good news that Jesus brought and helping people to see him clearly and to embrace the hope that Christ has to offer. And almost every missionary that I've ever talked to has told me when we're out there, we're working together to exalt Jesus, and we don't usually get hung up across denominational lines. One question I do have that I want to explore is, how do my Protestant brothers and sisters serving on missions interact with missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? In fact, if you've served on a mission, I'd be curious to know if you ran into any Protestant missionaries and what were those relationships and engagements like. Leave a comment in the comments section and give me some insight there, because I'm curious. So I want to say a special thank you to Justin and Lee, who helped make this tour possible. And I also want to say thank you to all the individuals at the MTC who so warmly received me, who answered all my questions, who not only showed me around, but let me leave to take care of something at BYU and then come back and grab some more video. You all were amazing. You were super kind, and I really appreciated this experience. And it gave me a lot of new and fresh insight into my understanding of the missionary culture with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Hit the thumbs up, like this video, subscribe to the channel, really helps us out, and come back for more videos like these as I continue to explore fighting criticism with curiosity. So until next time, I'll see you later, Saints.